ladies and gentlemen. My name is John Rendel, and I'm going to talk to you today about how the organisation I run, PEAS, is trying to create an approach to development that takes us from a band-aid approach and to a more smart-aid approach. I first travelled to Uganda in 2002, and here I am. I'm the tall one at the back there. For anyone who hasn't been, Uganda is an absolutely extraordinary country. It's an amazing mix of bright green, tropical vegetation and then deep terracotta soil. But the thing you notice more than anything else when you visit Uganda is that there are children absolutely everywhere. Everywhere you look, there are children, millions of children. In fact, the average age in Uganda, the median, is 16. So half of all Ugandans are under 16 years old. That's 18 million children. And of those 18 million children, I was befriended by this one, Sebufu. Sebufu was 14 years old when I met him, and he was just finishing primary school. And of the 80 students completing primary school in his year, only 5 were going to continue their education at secondary school. And Sebufu wasn't one of them. He was orphaned, and the fees at the school were too high for him. I found out later that in Uganda, the Millennium Development Goal to create universal primary education has led to a wave of kids finishing primary school and then not being able to go on to secondary school. So Sebufu is actually one of millions. Again, I tried to find a photo of 1 million kids, but I couldn't, so you have to times that by a lot. So in Uganda and across Africa, millions of kids don't go to secondary school because either they can't afford the fees, or because the schools just aren't there, they're having to walk too far, or even if the schools are there, and even if they're affordable, the quality's so low that parents just think, well, there's not much point. My child may as well help me out in the field because that's going to help our family more. And in 2002, as a 21-year-old who'd just benefited from one of the best educations in the world, I felt very strongly that Sebufu had to go to school. This one child, I felt he had to go to school. But I also began asking myself, if I help Sebufu, what about his younger brothers, and what about his younger sisters, and what about the millions of kids who I hadn't met? Why should I particularly help him? And was I actually going to have a big impact by doing that? And then about halfway through my trip, Sebufu invited me to what he said was one of his favourite places in the world. It's about a mile away from his home. This is Lake Victoria. As I sat next to Sebufu and the two of us looked out across the lake, you can imagine the romantic scene, and I got emotional. It's rare for an Englishman to get this emotional, but I did. And we looked out across the lake, and I made a decision that I was going to launch a school for Sebufu and for the other primary school students, the other primary school leavers, and I was going to do it whatever it took. At the same time, I felt a growing sense that even if I wanted to, I couldn't actually do anything else. You see, we live in a world in which the opportunities available to some children far outstrip those available to others. And I feel very, very strongly that to live in that world and to do nothing about it, is to say it's okay, or is to say it's someone else's problem. But it's not okay, and it is our problem. It's wrong, and that's why PEAS exists. Once you realize something must be done, as I had, the risk is that you just do something. You just do something because you feel like something must be done. But the important thing I knew at the time was really to then sit down and to think. The thing is, I worry that far too many charities and far too many development organizations spend all their time talking about the severity of the need, the severity of the problem, and far too little talking about the efficacy of the solution, really thinking through how they work to make sure they don't distort markets, to make sure they don't create dependency, really thinking through the model, rather than just saying we're doing good because we're working in a difficult situation. So the first thing I wanted to do was to make sure that what Peas did was financially sustainable, to make it a social enterprise rather than a pure charity. And so we developed a model, and we now call it Smart Aid, which is based on 3 levels of financial sustainability. And whilst it may sound boring, financial sustainability, it's the stuff that I get really excited about, because I feel we're doing something here which is different and is quite new. The first level is the schools themselves run under their own running costs. After they reach about 300, they benefit from enough returns to scale that they're entirely funded from a mixture of boarding school fees for the 25% of students that board, and they're generally a bit richer, so we cross-subsidise from them to keep the day school fees low, and the other 75% of kids pay their day school fees that basically just cover the cost of lunch. And we have a public-private partnership with the Ministry of Education in Uganda, where they give us a small amount per pupil per term. And then the last revenue stream is income-generating activities. And we operate small agribusinesses out of each of the schools to try and make sure that we can improve access to the school without lowering the quality. The second level of sustainability is that the network in Uganda is supported by a team in Kampala, and the network in Zambia, it was only 1 school at the moment, but hopefully that's going to grow, supported by teams that look at support and supervision. So it might be management, it might be auditing the schools, inspecting the schools, providing professional development training. And that work is funded by small amounts coming from each of the schools to cover the costs of that work. It hasn't happened yet, but by 2022, we want to get to a point where we've built a big network of 100,000 kids, but we don't have to send any more money from the UK to Uganda, so that we've developed a really sustainable approach. And the third level of sustainability is that each of the schools will build up reserves, bank reserves, which will mean that they can entirely rebuild themselves once every 25 to 30 years, which will deliver true long-term sustainability. And this sustainability is important, the financial sustainability is important because, as I say, it lowers dependency on external aid. And that's very empowering because it takes away that awful asymmetry of power between the rich country and the developing country. And it passes power to the country where actually the power needs to reside. It's more scalable because once we've built a school, once the school's running, the extra money we raise can build another school, so it's catalytic in that way. And of course that means that there's greater return on each pound which is invested in the organisation on the UK side or globally. For Peas, though, the sustainability is almost an irrelevance unless it's combined with these 2 other things. So we have 3 pillars of impact. Sustainability doesn't mean anything on its own. Sustainability of nothing is nothing. So sustainability needs to be sustainability of something worthwhile. And the other 2 pillars are access and quality. Our schools are supported by that expert team in Kampala who carry out the inspections, provide HR support, and that drives the quality. It drives the quality of the school, and it helps each of the schools improve year on year. And then in terms of access, by February, Peas will be educating 13,000 students in Uganda, which is about 1% of all the secondary school students there. But that's just enrolment, of course. What really matters to us is that our students are from poorer backgrounds than any other group of schools in Uganda, and that includes the government schools, because even though the government schools are ostensibly free, they all charge a range of hidden fees, which mean that actually their charges to students and the barriers to getting into government schools are higher than Peas schools. In fact, our charges are 71% of the charges in the government schools. And that means that our kids are from poorer backgrounds, and of our day school kids, 40% come from the bottom quintile, the bottom wealth quintile in rural Uganda. So even though we are charging these day school fees, we're reaching a group of kids who wouldn't have been able to have an education without us. And if we manage to achieve that target of 100,000 places, we'll be educating 7% of Ugandan children. And with a relatively small amount of money, that would show it's possible to deliver systemic change through aid. I don't believe that aid is dead, but I do believe that aid if aid is to be worthwhile, then we have to make it smarter. Thank you.